On a warm afternoon, September 5th, 1949, 72,000 people stood shoulder to shoulder at Cleveland Municipal Airport, staring at a warplane that didn't look like a warplane anymore, a P-51 Mustang. But not the Mustang they remembered from newsreels and victory parades. This one was stripped and sharpened, built for speed, not survival. The belly radiator was gone. The fuselage looked smooth like it had been carved by water. The lines were too clean, too fast, too confident. It wore a name that sounded like a promise, and it was winning. At over 400 miles per hour, the Mustang tore through the course like it was trying to outrun history itself. The pilot, Bill Odom, wasn't a seasoned pylon racer. He'd barely touched this kind of race before that weekend, but he was famous in a different way. Long distance, records, endurance, a man who'd crossed the world faster than people thought was possible. In the crowd, nobody was thinking about that difference. They were thinking about the sound. They were thinking about the blur. They were thinking about what it meant that a fighter, built to kill, could be turned into entertainment. Then on the second lap, something small happened. The kind of small mistake that means nothing in normal flight. But pylon racing isn't normal flight. Odom cut inside pylon 3. He tried to correct toward pylon 4. The Mustang rolled. For a moment it was inverted, hanging upside down, suspended in this air like the world had flipped and forgotten to flip back. And then it dropped, not into open ground, not into empty runway, into a house on West Street in Berea, Ohio, a house someone had moved into 4 days earlier. The pilot died instantly. So did a woman inside. So did her 13-month-old son. And 72,000 people watched the fire rise. That crash ended more than a race. It ended an era. It shut down Cleveland air racing and pushed the Mustang back into the shadows, like the world had finally decided the airplane belonged to the past. But the Mustang wasn't finished, because after World War II, the P-51 didn't die. It migrated. It slipped into a second life so unpredictable that if you described it in 1945, no one would believe you. A warplane turned race machine, a fighter turned ground attacker, a museum artifact that returned to combat, a propeller aircraft that would still be taking missions while jets circled overhead, like the future watching the past refuse to leave. This is the story of what happened to the P-51 Mustang after World War II, and it starts in a place most people don't like to imagine, the scrapyard. In 1945, peace didn't feel like relief. It felt like inventory. The United States had built an insane number of aircraft, bombers, fighters, transports, enough to win a global war, and enough to become a problem the moment the war ended. There were too many airplanes, too many Mustangs. Warehouses and depots across continents were filled with machines that had once been priceless. Now they were expensive to maintain and politically inconvenient to keep. So the solution was not gentle. It was brutal. Across America and Europe, crews cut perfectly good fighters apart with torches. Cranes dropped heavy steel plates onto airframes to snap them in half like broken toys. Manuals, entire histories, were burned in piles large enough to feel like bonfires for an era. A teenager named Ed Maloney watched it happen in California. He watched bombers split. He watched fighters crushed. He watched paper histories go up in flames. And someone told him something that sounded casual, almost careless. If you want any of it, take what you can carry. So he did. He made trip after trip, loading his car with technical manuals and documents, saving what he could from a system designed to erase it. It haunted him. It hardened into a vow. If the world was going to destroy these machines, he would spend his life trying to keep some of them alive. Most people didn't feel that way. To the public, these weren't sacred artifacts. They were surplus. Old warbirds sold for prices that barely made sense. Mustangs that had cost the government the equivalent of a fortune were auctioned for less than a new car. Some foreign governments acquired them for almost nothing. The message was clear. The propeller fighter had no future. Jets were coming. Speed was changing shape. And the Mustang, icon of the last war, looked like a relic. Then Korea happened. June 25, 1950. North Korea surged across the 38th parallel with tanks, numbers, momentum. Within days, the South collapsed into retreat. American commanders rushed to respond and immediately discovered something that should have been impossible. Their jets were fast, and that was the problem. Early jet fighters burned fuel like panic. They could reach the battlefield, yes, but they couldn't stay. They arrived with minutes to loiter before turning back toward safety. Support missions became drive-bys. By the time targets were identified, it was time to leave. And there was another problem. Jets needed long paved runways. Korea didn't have many. Forward fields were rough, cratered, damaged. Jet engines ingested debris and flamed out. The future choked on dirt, so the Air Force looked backward. And there it was, the Mustang. It could operate from dirt strips. It could loiter for hours. It could carry bombs, rockets, napalm. And hundreds of them were sitting in storage, waiting to be cut apart. So crews worked around the clock to bring them back. They pulled Mustangs from mothballs, recertified them, repaired them, rearmed them. They loaded them onto carriers and shipped them across the Pacific like resurrected ghosts being sent back to war. By late July, the Mustang was fighting again. Different designation, same airplane. But in Korea, the Mustang wasn't a high-altitude hunter anymore. It became something uglier, a low-level attacker, a tank killer, a truck destroyer, a plane that spent its time down where rifles could reach it. And that's where the Mustang's greatest strength became its fatal weakness. The Merlin engine, the heart of the P-51, was liquid-cooled. That cooling system was a single point of failure. One bullet through a radiator could mean the engine would seize within minutes. No heroic limp home, no long glide toward safety. Seconds to bail out or die with the aircraft. Engineers who had helped create the Mustang knew it. They said later that using it for close ground support was almost suicidal. But after World War II, the Air Force had scrapped other rugged piston aircraft that would have survived this job better. So the Mustang went because it was what existed, and it paid. It did the mission. It stayed over battlefields jets couldn't loiter over. It operated from forward strips jets couldn't use. Its presence changed ground battles. Enemy troops learned to fear that sound. Merlin Howell rolling in low. But the cost was relentless. Ground fire, winter icing, accidents, mechanical failure, no margin. Eventually, jets took the roll back. And American Mustangs faded out of frontline service. But in other parts of the world, the Mustang was just getting started. Because the P-51 wasn't only an American story, it became a global tool. A bargain fighter for nations rebuilding, improvising, surviving. In the late 1940s, a new nation in the Middle East needed aircraft fast. Embargoes made legal purchases difficult or impossible. So people did what people always do in desperate moments. They lied creatively. They found Mustangs. They shipped them under labels that didn't match reality. Crates that contained 3-ton fighters were described like harmless equipment. And once assembled, those Mustangs became the best fighters available. Fast, long range, capable of reaching deep targets and returning on one tank of fuel. The Mustang wasn't supposed to be part of that story, but it was. And a few years later, it was used in a way that sounds like fiction until you realize it happened. Over the Sinai Desert in 1956, Mustangs flew so low, their propellers nearly touched sand. Their mission wasn't to bomb. It wasn't to dogfight. It was to cut telephone wires, to sever the nervous system of an army that relied on landlines. Some pilots used special dragging devices to snag cables. When those devices failed or fell away, they didn't abort. They went even lower, and they cut the lines directly, with wings and propeller blades. It was an act of precision that left no room for survival if anything went wrong. And it worked. The Mustang kept evolving. Back in America, it evolved again into speed. Post-war civilians bought Mustangs for racing. They stripped armor, removed guns, smoothed rivets, tuned engines beyond what wartime commanders would have allowed. The Mustang became a machine designed to go just a little faster than any sane person should want, until tragedy forced the world to look at what it was doing. After the 1949 crash, organizers couldn't risk pylon races near neighborhoods. Sponsors vanished. Regulators threatened bans. Surplus military aircraft disappeared from major competition. The Mustang sat again, waiting. Then in the 1960s, far from cities, in the Nevada desert, racing returned. Reno, a wide-open place where the consequences wouldn't land on living rooms. The Mustangs came out like they'd been holding their breath for 15 years, and they flew faster than the aircraft had ever flown in wartime. But the Mustang's most haunting chapter wasn't speed. It was the moment history replayed itself one last time. While the world watched moon landings in supersonic jets, two small Central American nations went to war, and their air forces were relics, Corsairs, Mustangs, propeller fighters. They strafed, bombed, attacked, and in the chaos, piston aircraft fought piston aircraft in aerial combat. One of the last times it would ever happen. Prop versus prop. A final echo of the Second World War, 24 years late, over jungle. After that, the Mustang's combat career finally ended. But the airplane still didn't die, because people like Ed Maloney kept their vow. He spent years buying and trading aircraft, saving what others threw away. He opened his collection to the public. Others did the same. Restoration shops emerged. A warbird culture grew. Merlin engines, long out of production, were rebuilt and kept alive. Mustangs that once sold for surplus prices became million-dollar artifacts, not because they were practical, because they were living history. Today, Mustangs still fly at air shows. They still race. They still appear in films. They wear markings from units that vanished decades ago, like uniforms that never got retired. Some carry old radios beside modern avionics. Past and present share in the same cockpit, and when the engine starts, it does something museums can't. It makes the past loud. The P-51 Mustang was designed fast, under pressure, because a war demanded it. It was supposed to be a temporary answer. Instead, it became the defining fighter of World War II. And when that war ended, the Mustang refused to accept retirement. It reinvented itself in Korea, in the Middle East, in Latin America, over deserts and jungles and race courses. It outlived its factories. It outlived its designers. It outlived the world that built it. And it still flies for one reason that has nothing to do with metal or horsepower. Because people refuse to let it disappear, which leaves one uncomfortable question hanging in the air. If the Mustang could keep coming back again and again, long after everyone called it obsolete, what else is waiting for the next crisis to resurrect it?